This afternoon rather, we have two speakers, Maddie McNabb and Rachel Cooper, and Mr. Zohar is going to introduce you.
Now, my pleasure to introduce Maddie McNabb and Rachel Cooper. To hint at what I think they're going to speak about. I'm not 100% sure. So they're high school superstars. We're looking at Maddie's the valedictorian for the year, Rachel wins the Rogers Prize. They both get really high grades at everything they take, and most importantly, they're the head editors of Graffiti that year. They actually wrote part of their own introduction. Which like during their grade 12 year at NT, Rachel and Maddie could both be found hunched over a computer in the graffiti office, working on the latest issue of the school paper until the wee hours of the morning. They loved every minute of being co-editors-in-chief and miraculously stayed friends throughout the whole experience. So, it was absolutely wonderful for me. So, thank you, Rachel, as I saw you again today. Spent both grade 12 years in sweatpants. And here she is looking so fantastic, so professional, both of them are. One day you will too. Now, so, they graduate high school, as I said, high school superstars. But what's the problem? They go and study the arts. Maddie studies philosophy and French, very lucrative fields, at the University of King's College in Halifax. She also, while she was there, she was running a grassroots arts workshop called School Arts, and developed a passion for public history, working in Pier 21 at the Immigration Museum. After university, she travels to work on her French. Rachel studied history at Queen's University and was very heavily involved in the school newspaper there. I think she might tell us a little bit about what she did at Queen's, I'm not sure. She graduates in 2011. Now, what's next? An arts degree, what will it lead to? And I think they're going to try and suggest to you that there are paths it can lead you to, and very satisfying paths, I hope. Maddie is currently working with Historica Canada. You're familiar with them because they're the ones who create the Heritage Moments for TV as well as other programs. She coordinates educational programs. She's been coordinating educational programs there since 2012. Rachel creates software for colleges and universities and is the marketing and public relations manager where she heads up the marketing department at their company. So, without any more waiting, they'll now tell you again the path after an arts degree.
Hi everyone. It's great to be here, though as Mr. Zohar was saying, it's not like coming back because we were in the old building, so we don't even know where we are, except for a few familiar faces among the teachers, so thanks for having us in your cool new auditorium. So I'm Maddie, and this is Rachel. We, as Baruch mentioned, both took arts degrees, and as you can sort of tell, we went in pretty different directions. As I'm sure you've been told, arts degrees are pretty unpredictable and are often not promoted to you as the best career-oriented option. But what we're going to focus on is basically how we've used ours in what we think is pretty successful ways and what we learned from the experience. So the focus is going to be on how we use them, not which degree we took, not which subjects we studied, but how we used our degrees and the university environment to make opportunities. So quick audience question. How many of you are considering some kind of an arts degree for next year? All right, it's a good show of hands. I assume the old double thumbs down comment from the middle is not an arts major. And how many of you have been in some way, shape, or form warned against taking an arts degree? So there's a lot of hands. Yeah, I'll let Rachel continue.
So clearly you've heard much of the negative talk surrounding arts degrees, and this is coming from a lot of directions. Last week, the Globe and Mail ran an article called "The More You Write, the Less You Make." And a few years ago, Margaret Wente wrote in the Globe and Mail that if your degree is in sociology, psych, art history, or much else on the soft side, you are a dime a dozen. Have you heard of supply and demand? Sorry, you're on the wrong side of the equation. Yet fortunately, this isn't always the case, and Maddie and I are going to talk a little bit about why an arts degree worked out well for us and what we liked about it.
One thing we would say to Miss Wente is, and I think you guys are probably more aware of this than she is, the times have changed, and a university degree, even a BSc as well as a BA, is no longer a ticket to a job. What we've learned and what a lot of our friends have learned is that no matter what, you're going to have to hustle in your 20s to get a job, to enter the labor market, and to find something that interests you and gets you excited. So we're going to look back on how we sort of did that. And so that's why I think even if you didn't put your hands up for an arts degree, there's some things to think about in here for any university undergrad. One caveat, we're going to talk about a lot of ways we found success, but just keep in mind as a backdrop, there was a lot of trial and error, there was a lot of loitering around in cafes, not doing our readings, there was a lot of making really great friends and hanging out in the campus pub, so that stuff is super important too. So keep that balance in mind as we're talking about the more sort of academic and professional success.
So I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about my time in Queen's, where I went to school. So as you heard, I now work in marketing at a tech company, but I did my degree in history. Now, my degree focused on changing industries and societies. I wrote a thesis about how the role of women in a specific religious group, the Anabaptists, changed during the Reformation. And it was really great. I enjoyed it a lot. There's not a lot written about this group, so I had to dig into primary sources, put it all together. And I enjoyed the subject matter. I learned a lot, especially pertaining to research skills and critical thinking skills and other transferable and very important things that you learn in an arts degree. But truth be told, I was far more committed to my extracurriculars than I was to academia. So, during my first 2 years at Queen's, I dabbled in a few positions, tried a few different things, and eventually I settled into working at the Queen's Journal. The Journal is the student newspaper. It's entirely student-run. It's published 2 times per week throughout the whole academic year, and it's the oldest student newspaper in North America. So first I worked as an assistant news editor. I wrote 2 to 4 articles a week, and I worked as part of a big team. Now the big team aspect was really important because in a lot of degrees you spend a lot of time in group work, but this isn't always the case in arts, so this was a great way to learn how to get those skills that are so important in the business world. I also got a lot of experience with InDesign, Photoshop, and web publishing, all things that are pretty valued in the business world, but that you aren't always taught unless you take a degree specifically focused there. The next year, I worked as the managing editor though. This was a big job. I worked about 60 to 80 hours a week at the newspaper on top of going to school full-time. Together with my co-editor, I managed about 100 people, and we had a $500,000 budget for the year. We dealt with everything from staffing issues, we learned how to hire and fire, we fought for budget, we learned to track metrics, we learned how to rebrand an organization. And this type of experience is pretty hard to get, even if you're doing a commerce degree or something more acutely related to business. It's really hands-on, and you're given a lot of chance to trial and error. In the end, it worked out really well for us though. In addition to our core responsibilities, we took on the additional work of redesigning the print publication, redesigning our website, re-engineering our marketing and distribution plans, and as a result, we were able to run the first surplus that the newspaper had had in years. Now, I'm sure you've heard about the tough journalism climate, and this was true for us too. So this was a great way to learn how to make a business thrive in a tough economic climate, which no one can predict and is a great thing to learn. And especially because we had the university as a safety net, where we were really taken care of and we really couldn't make the wrong decisions. So we were able to take the risks that we needed to succeed. Working at the newspaper led to summer jobs. I worked at the Kingston local paper, the Whig Standard, where I had access to a lot of mentorship through senior journalists and editors. And we were also offered opportunities to speak with Paul Martin, Roberta Bondar, and other top public figures and politicians. Now, what was interesting about this was a unique opportunity for students. And your university time will be a special time where you are offered a lot of unique opportunities. I was often in situations at press conferences where senior reporters from places like the CBC were denied interviews, but the students were given precedence and the students were let in. Basically, I learned a lot in academia, but the skills that I learned at the Journal was where I was able to develop the practical and turn theoretical ideas into practical knowledge. And it's that knowledge that I was able to take forward to do well in my professional career.
So I, as Mr. Zohar mentioned, work now for a history education nonprofit. I studied neither history nor education. I went to the University of King's College in Halifax, where I did the foundation year program. Maybe some of you have heard of it. I could go on at length, but I'll leave that for another time. Basically, it's a program that takes you, get a whole year to go through sort of the great thinkers of the world, from Plato, who you may have heard of, all the way up to, you know, the 20th and even 21st century. So you're getting this survey of thought, you're getting opened up to a whole bunch of new ideas, political theories, philosophy, literature, and it's a pretty interesting classic liberal arts education. So why did I choose this? At one point I was in your shoes, and it wasn't clear to me, you know, it was, this sounds like an adventure. It was, Halifax is a new city where I've never been and where none of my friends are going. And to some degree it was, I'm interested in being challenged intellectually. So off I went. You know, all I knew starting out was that I think Plato may have worn a toga, may have said a few things about the world, and I found pretty quickly that I was able to read these complex texts, and I was able to understand them with the help of my professors and my peers. So what I'm getting at is basically one of the big things you learn in an arts degree, which is critical thinking skills. Now, I'm sure you've heard this before. What does this actually mean? This means you learn how to listen. You learn how to disagree with your peers. You learn how to read something and then ask the right questions that are going to help you understand the bigger picture. You learn how to build an argument, how to research, and these are incredible transferable skills that really stuck with me. You know, I probably couldn't tell you everything I learned about Nietzsche, for example, who is a philosopher that you may learn about in coming years. But the actual critical thinking skills are what carried through. So critical thinking is great and definitely transfers to the professional world, but it's important to note that an arts degree is not job training. I found when I was just going to classes, it was great, and the campus sort of life can be really exciting. You've got all your new friends. You can very much stay within campus and find a lot to do. But there is something more beyond campus, which is whatever city you choose to go to school in. There's a community there, and what I found was that outside of my classes, I felt I wanted more. So I took a bus to the north end of Halifax, and I started volunteering as an adult literacy tutor, where I met a group of new immigrant women who were taking English lessons while their kids were at school. So I learned about those folks who also lived in Halifax. I got involved with a student arts initiative called School Arts, where we actually got to go into elementary schools and run alternative arts workshops. So I learned a bit of that. I cared about social welfare and the community around me, and I learned also that I was interested in education and providing alternatives to the school system. And these were things I learned only by sort of forcing myself to get outside of that campus bubble and get involved in the community. These were practical, very solid experiences that taught me as much about what I like and what I don't like, what I'm good at and what I'm not good at professionally as my classes did. So eventually my academic and professional interests did overlap a bit. I got really interested in the philosophy of memory, which sounds sort of complicated, but it's really just how do we remember things? How do we remember historical events publicly, and what stories do we tell about our past? I started getting super interested in this idea and thinking, how can I turn this into experiences? You know, I didn't want to change majors, I didn't want to study history, so I took another route. I got a summer job at a museum in Halifax, the Immigration Museum called Pier 21. And there I started doing immigration research in the Research Center. It was a turning point in my interests. People were telling me their stories and their family stories of coming to Canada, and I was learning so much about Canadian immigration history and how important it was to the identity of many Canadians, and I'm sure many of you in this room. At this job, I made sure to tell my bosses that I was passionate about it and I wanted to get more involved, and that worked. They let me work with the oral history collection. I ended up working there for 2 summers, and they offered me a job after I graduated, where I eventually conducted oral history interviews with post-war immigrants. So I was able to sort of come sideways into the history field by figuring out these interests. And without quite knowing it really until looking back, I was beginning to carve out that professional niche that was just mine, that combination of history, education, and also this expertise in immigration issues.
After university and where we've gone since then. So I work at a tech company. It's actually located right at Eglinton, and we create business software for higher education institutions and universities. So we work with big name schools, Stanford, NYU, Penn State, UCLA, or closer to home, U of T and Western. And we give them the software they need to manage their non-traditional students. Now these are students who might be studying online, they might be adults, they might be corporations sending their employees back to school for a certificate. And our software handles the entire business operation, from registration to financial tracking, enrollment, everything like that. And so clearly, my company is focused on higher ed. And this is a pretty cool industry to work in right now. There have been a few quotes of people talking about how higher ed is currently having its internet moment. Now what this means is it's exploding and it's changing, and it's really making an impact on the rest of society, much like the internet did in the 90s. Now it's more true in the US than in Canada, but there's a big shift in student demographic going on in higher ed right now. In addition to students coming out of high school and going away to go to school full-time, there's also tons of adult students who are enrolling part-time while they're during their career. There's international students who are going to school online, and there's just so many more students in the system than ever before that there's also more money in the system than ever before. As a result, there's more players, and there's about 7,000 accredited schools in the US right now. And because of this rampant competition, there's predictions that about half of them will be bankrupt within the next 15 years. So, my role is to manage the marketing department, and I help schools and influence them to see the opportunity that this climate provides, rather than just seeing the inherent challenges. So I work with a team of about 5 core players and a number of contractors, and funny enough, almost everyone who works in my marketing team has an arts degree. So what do? We do a little bit of traditional marketing, going to conferences, writing press releases, that type of thing. But mostly we do content marketing. So content marketing tells a story, and it informs the consumer, basically educating them and creating a need for a product where there may not have been one before. We teach them about what we can do, why we can do it better, and why they need us. Basically, rather than selling product features, we sell a knowledgeable company. So, 3 years ago, I graduated from university, and I was initially hired by the company to start an online newspaper called The Evolution. The newspaper is dedicated to non-traditional higher education, and it would really fill the void in the industry. Further, it's unique because although we publish daily, we don't actually have any reporters. Instead, what we do is we get everyone from university presidents to deans to students, even right down to the employers that hire those students, to write their own articles talking about where they see the industry going, what change they think needs to happen, even questions that they might have. And in the past 3 years that we've been working on this paper, it's become quite successful. We have about 1,000 regular contributors and about 40,000 monthly readers. So as a result, our team has expanded. And now this marketing department does a lot more than just run this newspaper. We also create tons of materials. Everything from white papers, research papers, infographics, executive guides, you name it, we create it. It's all in non-traditional higher education. And then we distribute it using social media, email distribution, dynamic websites, everything like that as well, to get it out to people who matter, the leaders of the universities who can really invoke change. So, I'm in charge of hiring and managing my team, setting the strategy, keeping everyone on track. And we really do have a lot of different things going on and a lot of balls in the air. What we see is that since we started this newspaper and since we began this content marketing initiative, there are a lot of other companies in our space that are trying to do similar things. Maybe not everything, but parts of it. But a lot of them fail at it. And the big thing is that they play their marketing efforts really safe, and they do it in a really traditional way. And it doesn't seem to go that well. And here's where an arts degree is a real advantage in the business world. It really teaches you how to think creatively and how to think critically. So every time that I need a new tactic or strategy, I have to go back to the drawing board and really think it through. Now, this can be a disadvantage because it takes longer. It's harder. You can't just pull a page out of a textbook and say, here you go. And truth be told, I cried a lot when I first started because I didn't know how to handle it. But you quickly figure it out, and in the end, we've been able to be more creative and more original, and really come up with really cool ways to promote marketing, promote the company, and impact the higher ed industry as a whole. When I first started, though, I came in with a journalism and marketing background, and this was really rare. You didn't see a lot of people in marketing with this type of background. But as we move past traditional marketing, and as storytelling and educational marketing become more common, which they really have started to become in the past few years, it becomes a lot more common and even beyond accepted, encouraged to hire journalists, to hire writers, and to hire people with a critical thinking arts background into these key business roles.
So as Mr. Zohar mentioned, I work at Historica Canada. I figured most of you might know it from the Heritage Minutes. Perhaps the quote, "I smell burnt toast," rings a bell. So my organization made those. In general, we try to get people, specifically students and teachers, excited about Canadian history and excited about talking about Canadian identity and citizenship. I run one of their educational programs called Passages Canada. Passages Canada is a storytelling initiative. We have speakers all over the country who volunteer to go into school groups and community groups and tell their personal stories of immigration and cultural identity. So I get to continue to work with immigration stories and to work towards our goals, which is getting people talking about the complexity of Canadian identity today, you know, all the inputs from around the world that have created what a Canadian is. And giving a platform to all the little voices, all the individual voices that make up our country. So it's very interesting. I get to do that public history work that I've been interested in since my undergrad. So public history could be at a museum, at a gallery, creating a memorial, or at a history education organization like mine. The question we're asking is constantly, what version of Canadian history are we telling? What stories, what old stories are we challenging? And what newer, untold stories are we trying to bring to the foreground? So when we make a new Heritage Minute about the War of 1812, do we talk about Sir Isaac Brock, or do we talk about the Indigenous warriors who were key players in the Battle of Queenston Heights? These are a lot of the issues that are at play in history and in public history right now, is trying to bring out different voices, new voices, to challenge the old versions of Canadian history. So what does this actually entail? I don't do straight up historical research. I manage my whole program, which is really multifaceted. So I'm managing volunteers who live across the country. I'm making sure that as many teachers and people as possible know about this opportunity to get a free speaker to come to their classroom. organizing events and workshops throughout the year to get people talking about immigration issues. So a panel event on a particular theme, or a workshop that teaches people how to tell their own story, for example. I'm managing a budget. I am making sure that we have money, since we are a nonprofit, writing grants to ensure that the program can keep going when our current round of funding runs out. So those are a lot of the sort of challenges, and as you can tell, it is broad. You have to have a broad skill set, you have to be resourceful, and you have to be creative. And this is what is demanded by a lot of smaller arts and cultural organizations who don't have the funding to hire a whole communications department, a marketing department, an events department. They're hoping that individuals are going to have all of these skills and be able to, as I said before, hustle to make it happen. So these are very transferable skills, basically. Being a creative, as Rachel said, creative thinker and communicator who can solve complex problems and juggle lots of priorities. This is helpful in any field. One thing I wanted to mention about basically sort of how I got this job. I mean, some of it was my history experience, some of it was the vaguely relevant degree and volunteer stuff that all combined to show my general interest in history and in education. Sure, but honestly, a lot of it was my bilingualism. I chose to take French in university, and this was good, but I actually really didn't become fluently bilingual until I made the time to immerse myself in a French environment after school. I went and traveled and worked in France and Morocco for 6 months, and I really upped my bilingualism. At that point, I was comfortable applying for a job that demanded that you could speak French and English, and that set me apart, especially in a city like Toronto, where there are perhaps less bilingual individuals. So for that reason alone, if you're considering a career in the arts, I would encourage you to pursue French. Also, just the joy of learning another language and having the time to do it in your undergrad that you're probably not going to have when you're older. We all say that perhaps we'll take night classes and learn Russian, but it's not happening so far. Last thing I'll say for arts and culture in general, a lot of these organizations rely on government grants. So we're relying on public money to make it happen, and this is very precarious. This could be taken away at any moment. An administration changes, the amount of money available changes, and also who they're giving it to. Personally, so far, I've strung together a career with a series of 1 year, 6 month, and even 3 month contracts. This is somewhat the norm in the field, and it may seem a little bit scary and maybe not the job security you hope for, but I don't think it means that we are doomed as arts grads. I think it's more reason to work hard. I know I have a job today, but what about in a year? Though it's scary, I think it pushes me to be a better, more engaged professional. I'm continuing to challenge myself, and this helps fight the kind of numbing tendency of the 9 to 5, which I'm sure maybe in summer jobs you guys have learned or will learn soon. It can be challenging to have those 40 hours of your week sectioned off. So I carve out my niche. I continue to do that outside of my 40 hours a week. I help run the community orchestra that I'm in, learning about managing arts and from a different angle. I continue to be engaged with immigrant issues. I run an English conversation circle for newcomer women out in the East End. I'm about to contribute to an online feminist journal for the first time. So I'm trying to maintain that open-mindedness and well-roundedness that I think I started in my degree. First, because the current labor market demands that, but also because it's awesome and fun. I continue to hone my passions and take any appealing opportunity to develop as a person and hopefully add another little line of experience to my resume. So now we've got a few sort of like lessons learned, either things we lived by or things we wished we knew, and then we'll let it go to questions.
firstly, from my experience and from the experience of many of my friends who did arts degrees, we found that two things really help you when you're in an arts degree and looking for a job and looking for success in the employment world afterwards. They're developing practical skills and creating a personal brand or narrative around your experience. Basically, I told you how Wente says that arts grads are a dime a dozen. But if you can forge out your own niche, your own brand, your own narrative that you understand and that your resume speaks to, you can really differentiate yourself in the workplace. And the difficulty with an arts degree is that it isn't baked right into your curriculum. You do need to look elsewhere to manage to develop that. Grad school is one option. Neither Maddie nor I took that path though. But there are a lot of other ways you can do it. I chose the extracurricular route, but there's post-grad certificates, there's community involvement, you can learn another language, there's tons of ways to explore and develop your niche. All you really need to do is figure out what that niche or story or brand is, and spend the time that you have in your arts degree looking to develop it and figuring out how you can offer it to the world.
So I think probably what you've learned, you probably gleaned this through our talk, but I think we both agree that arts, university in general, your undergraduate degree, is a very unique space, and it's a privileged space where you have access to amazing opportunities and sometimes more responsibility than you'll have as a 20-something entering the workforce. So just take advantage of that, get involved in student government if that's your thing, contribute to a journal, make the most of that. And if you don't think you can engage genuinely, if you don't even know where to start, maybe don't go. We are talking about a very specific option here, which is a university arts degree, If it's not right for you, then I think ourselves and other people we know who've done arts would agree that it's no good as a stopgap measure, but if you make the most of it, it can open a million doors. Last thing we're going to leave you with is seek mentors. This is something that we probably didn't do enough of. Be humble, if a professor interests you, talk to that person. Go see a career counselor, they might give you something useful to think about. Talk to people like us who have graduated. If you want to talk to us particularly, we can give you our email addresses. I did a bit of a crowdsourcing on Facebook where I asked all my arts grad friends, what was the one piece of advice you wish you had when you started? The response was overwhelming. I would say about 30 of my friends wrote essays. So they are just waiting for you to ask those questions. Reach out to people and seek mentors. And that's what we'll leave you with. Thanks for listening.
We have time for a few questions. There are two microphones at in the aisles there. If you can maybe get the lights up, if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, you have to go back, and I'm sure that there are surprise quizzes waiting for all of you in the classrooms.
So first of all, thank you for coming here today to talk to us. And my question is, what was the first job you had after graduating out of university?
First job?
Yeah, first job.
For me, as I said, I'd been doing the summer jobs at this museum, the Pier 21 Immigration Museum. And luckily for me, they offered me a full-time job when I graduated. So I worked at the Research Center at Pier 21. One really practical piece of advice I'll give is the reason I had those summer jobs